The rain had been falling for hours, turning the dirt roads into slick rivers of mud, soaking through the uniforms of the squad as they trudged forward under the weight of their gear. Each step felt heavier than the last, morale was low, and whispers passed between the younger recruits about the uselessness of dragging an old relic of a rifle into the field. That relic belonged to Captain Eleanor Hayes, a woman whose face carried the lines of years of war and whose gun looked like it belonged in a museum more than on the battlefield. The weapon was an old bolt-action rifle, scarred and scratched, its wooden stock worn smooth by hands long dead and battles long forgotten. The new soldiers, each armed with sleek rifles that fired rapidly with deadly accuracy, laughed behind her back whenever she carried that rifle over her shoulder. They thought she kept it as a sentimental trinket, a memory of better days, or perhaps a stubborn refusal to embrace the modern age. Yet Eleanor never explained, never argued. She simply cleaned it every night, whispering something under her breath as she ran a cloth along the barrel, as though the weapon carried a soul only she could hear. The mission they had been assigned was simple on paper: escort a convoy of medics and supplies through a ruined valley once used by insurgents but declared cleared months ago. But every soldier knew that cleared was never truly cleared, and valleys had a way of hiding both enemies and death. The squad's nerves grew tighter with each passing mile, and the weight of silence pressed on them heavier than the rain. Eleanor walked near the front, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the cliffs above them. She had been in this exact kind of valley before, too many times to count, and she recognized the faint echoes of stones shifting in ways that rain alone could not explain. The younger men noticed her vigilance and scoffed among themselves, thinking she was paranoid. One, a private barely old enough to shave, muttered just loud enough for his comrades to hear, "She should have retired with that antique." Laughter rippled through the group, but Eleanor gave no reaction, her gaze never wavering from the ridges above. She had heard it all before, on every mission, from every generation of soldiers who thought age meant weakness. She had survived where many had not, and she had no interest in proving herself with words. The first shot came from the ridge to the east, slicing through the rain with a crack that made the squad freeze. A bullet found its home in the side of the lead transport, shattering glass and spraying the interior with shards. Then came the second and the third, followed by the unmistakable roar of a coordinated ambush. From both sides of the valley, hidden insurgents unleashed hell, and the mud became a trap, sucking at the boots of soldiers as they scrambled for cover. Chaos erupted, men shouting, guns firing blindly into the ridges, the convoy drivers panicking as bullets chewed into metal. The squad's leader, Lieutenant Markson, barked orders, but they were lost in the cacophony of explosions and screams. Soldiers huddled behind rocks that offered little protection, their modern rifles spitting rapid fire but unable to pin down enemies hidden high above in fortified positions. Eleanor moved without hesitation. She did not dive into cover or waste ammunition spraying at shadows. Instead, she slid the strap of her old rifle from her shoulder, her hand steady despite the storm of death around her. She found a patch of ground slightly elevated, knelt into the mud and calmly opened the bolt of her rifle, sliding a single round into the chamber. Her squad barely noticed her. Most were too busy trying to keep their heads down. A few who did glance at her laughed bitterly as if she had finally gone mad, thinking her antique could do what their advanced weapons could not. But Eleanor had no time for their disbelief. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, her cheek pressed against the worn stock as though it were an old friend. Her breath slowed, the chaos around her dimmed, and in that suspended moment she listened, not to the rain, not to the screams, but to the silence between shots, the rhythm of the ambush. She saw him then, a shadow flickering against the lightning, the leader who directed the enemy fire with hand signals. He was perched high on a ridge, his head barely exposed for seconds at a time, confident that no modern rifle could pick him off through the sheets of rain. Eleanor exhaled and pulled the trigger. The crack of her rifle was deeper, sharper than the rapid staccato of the others, a sound that carried with it a weight of history. The bullet cut through the storm like a whisper, unerring, and struck the shadow clean between the eyes. For an instant, the enemy leader stood frozen before collapsing backward into the mud and stone. The effect was immediate. The rhythm of the ambush faltered, their fire became erratic, uncertain, and their coordination dissolved. The squad's younger soldiers looked up in disbelief, their mouths open as though the impossible had just unfolded before them. Markson shouted for them to push forward, and with renewed courage they surged out of cover, their rifles finally finding targets in the disorganized enemy ranks. Grenades flew, smoke rose, and one by one the insurgents broke, retreating into the cliffs, dragging their wounded with them. When the last echoes of gunfire faded, silence reclaimed the valley. The convoy was battered but intact, not a single medic lost, though the transports were riddled with holes. The soldiers gathered, some shaking, some staring wide-eyed at Eleanor, who was calmly cleaning her rifle, sliding another bullet into her pouch as if nothing remarkable had occurred. No one laughed now. No one mocked. They simply watched, understanding that the aged gun they had belittled had, with one perfect shot, saved them all. The squad huddled near the damaged transports, rain still dripping from their helmets as they tried to process what had just happened. Adrenaline lingered in their veins, leaving their hands trembling even as they reloaded magazines and checked their wounded. Lieutenant Markson walked slowly toward Eleanor, his boots squelching in the mud, his face a mixture of disbelief and something almost resembling respect. "That shot," he began, but his words trailed off, swallowed by the sound of rain pattering against metal. Eleanor didn't look at him. She simply continued wiping down the bolt of her rifle, her movements methodical, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Around them, the younger soldiers whispered, but this time there was no mockery in their voices, only awe and confusion. One muttered, "I didn't even see the guy. How the hell did she hit him?" Another answered, "She didn't just hit him, she dropped him with one bullet." The disbelief in their tone spoke louder than their words. Markson crouched near her, lowering his voice. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that, Captain?" Eleanor finally looked up, her eyes cold and sharp, carved by decades of loss. "War teaches you everything if you survive long enough," she replied, her voice low but steady. There was no pride, no boast in her words, only fact. She closed the bolt of her rifle with a click that echoed through the silence, and then stood, her figure tall and unshaken despite the storm. Markson wanted to ask more, but the convoy demanded attention. The ambush had damaged the vehicles badly, and though they had fended off the attack, there was no guarantee the enemy wouldn't return with reinforcements. Time was now their greatest enemy. The medics worked frantically, patching up the few who had been hit during the firefight. One soldier, a private who had earlier laughed at Eleanor's weapon, now sat with a bandage on his arm, staring at her with something between shame and gratitude. The rest of the squad formed a defensive perimeter, scanning the cliffs for any sign of movement. Yet despite their watchfulness, they glanced repeatedly toward Eleanor, as though the sight of her calm figure anchored their courage. Her rifle, once ridiculed, was now seen with a reverence none dared voice. It wasn't just the weapon, of course. It was her, the way she carried herself, the unshakable certainty she exuded even in the jaws of death. Night fell quickly in the valley, the rain slowing to a drizzle that left the world smelling of wet earth and smoke. The squad lit no fires, unwilling to reveal their position, and instead huddled beneath tarps and broken metal, their breath clouding in the chill air. Tension clung to them all, every snapping twig or shifting rock in the dark cliffs above making hearts race and hands grip triggers. Markson sat with Eleanor at the edge of the camp, both of them staring into the black void of the valley. After a long silence he asked, "That rifle, it's not standard issue, is it?" Eleanor's lips curled slightly, though it was not a smile. "No. It was my father's." She paused, her eyes distant as if she were looking through time itself. "He carried it through a different war, a dirtier one. When he passed it to me he said it wasn't the gun that mattered, but the trust between it and the one who carried it. I never forgot that." Markson studied her face, lit only by faint moonlight, and realized this was not just a soldier, it was someone forged in battles far older than any of them had ever seen. As the hours dragged on, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The men shifted uneasily, whispering that the enemy would return. They feared another ambush before dawn, when exhaustion and darkness would weigh heaviest on their minds. Some even suggested abandoning the transports and fleeing on foot, but Eleanor silenced them with a single glance. "If we run, they'll hunt us through the night. If we hold, they'll think twice before bleeding themselves again. We've already broken them once. We can do it again." Her words were not shouted, not even spoken with authority, yet they cut through doubt like steel. Even Markson, who bore the formal command, did not argue. He felt the weight of her certainty, and in that moment he realized she had become the true anchor of the squad. Just before dawn, when the mist was thickest and the valley drowned in a heavy silence, the enemy returned. The first sign was not the crack of a rifle but the whisper of shifting shadows on the ridges, the faint glint of steel in the moonlight. Eleanor had been awake, her rifle already resting across her knees. She saw the movement before anyone else and rose without a word. By the time the first shot rang out, she had already shouldered her weapon. This time there was no disbelief among the squad, no laughter behind her back. They looked to her instinctively, as though they knew she could see the battlefield in a way none of them could. She squeezed the trigger, and another enemy marksman collapsed before he even had the chance to fire a second shot. Her bullets signaled the squad to rise, to fight, to believe they could hold. The firefight that followed was brutal, louder and closer than the first. Grenades shook the earth, muzzle flashes lit the cliffs like lightning, and the valley roared with chaos. Yet amid the storm, Eleanor's rifle cracked in steady rhythm, each shot deliberate, each bullet finding its target. Where the younger soldiers wasted magazines in bursts of panic fire, she conserved, choosing her moments with surgical precision. And each time her rifle spoke, another threat fell silent. By the time the sun began to climb over the cliffs, painting the valley in pale gold, the ground was littered with bodies, and the survivors of the enemy force retreated once more, broken and scattered. The squad, bruised and battered, realized that they were still alive, not because of their superior weapons, not because of sheer numbers, but because one woman and her aged rifle had stood unyielding when fear threatened to consume them all. The valley was quiet again, though the quiet felt heavier than before, as though it pressed down on the lungs of every soldier still breathing. Smoke clung to the cliffs, and the smell of cordite, blood, and wet earth lingered like a curse that refused to leave. The squad sat in exhaustion, their faces pale beneath streaks of mud and soot. Some cleaned their rifles with trembling hands, others simply stared into the distance, unable to believe they had survived a second ambush. The medics moved among them, tending to wounds both minor and grave, their voices hushed. Lieutenant Markson, his uniform torn and his helmet dented by shrapnel, walked among his men with slow, deliberate steps, offering words of steadiness he did not entirely feel himself. But his eyes drifted constantly to Eleanor, who sat apart from the others, her aged rifle resting across her lap as she calmly checked the chamber, her motions ritualistic, precise, and unhurried. Her calmness was contagious. Even the most frightened soldiers seemed to draw strength from simply knowing she was still watching over them. By now, every man in the squad knew that without her they would be corpses in the mud. Their respect was no longer silent but tangible, carried in the way they looked at her, the way their conversations stopped whenever she shifted or stood. None dared to joke about her weapon anymore. Instead, they began to wonder what stories it held, what battles it had endured long before they had even been born. It was as if the rifle itself had proven something, as though it were no longer a relic but a living force. Private Collins, the youngest in the squad, found himself staring at her across the fireless camp, guilt gnawing at him for the words he had once spoken. He remembered laughing about the museum piece, mocking her under his breath. Now he could not meet her eyes. She had saved him, not once but twice, and the weight of that truth silenced him more effectively than any reprimand ever could. Markson approached her again, crouching down so their eyes met at the same level. His face was weary but resolute. "We can't stay here," he said softly. "They'll regroup, maybe come back stronger. Command wants us to reach the outpost on the other side of the ridge, but the transports won't survive another mile. We'll have to move on foot." Eleanor nodded once, showing no surprise. She had already reached the same conclusion hours ago. "Then we travel light," she replied. "Take only what we need, leave the rest. They'll circle back for the supplies, but if we're gone, we might live long enough to see dawn again." Markson hesitated, then gave the order. The soldiers began stripping the damaged transports, loading only medical packs, ammunition, and water onto their backs. The rest they left behind, knowing it would fall into enemy hands but accepting it as the cost of survival. As they prepared to march, Eleanor walked among them, quietly adjusting straps, redistributing weight, handing out extra bandages and canteens. She did not give speeches, but her actions steadied them more than words could. When she paused beside Private Collins, she placed a hand on his shoulder briefly. He looked up at her, startled, but she said nothing, only moved on. The gesture alone was enough to unshackle the guilt in his chest. He gripped his weapon tighter, silently vowing he would not falter again. They set out before dawn, their boots sinking into the wet earth as they moved single file through the misty valley, leaving behind the skeletons of their ruined convoy. The march was grueling. The rain had ceased, but the mud clung stubbornly, sapping strength from every step. The cliffs loomed on either side, silent and watchful, like the eyes of predators waiting for weakness. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, and exhaustion gnawed at them like teeth. But whenever someone began to stumble, they looked ahead and saw Eleanor's silhouette at the front, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her pace steady, her back unbent. She carried herself with a certainty that refused to yield, and that certainty became theirs. Even Markson, the official commander, followed her lead without hesitation. He understood now what his men already knew: she was the spine of the squad, the reason they were still alive. As they neared the ridgeline, the terrain grew treacherous. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, sending pebbles clattering into unseen depths below. The path narrowed, forcing them to move carefully in single file. The medics struggled under the weight of their supplies, and every step felt like an invitation for death. Eleanor moved ahead, scanning the cliffs, her instincts prickling. She stopped suddenly, raising a hand, and the entire squad froze. Markson moved beside her, whispering, "What is it?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Her eyes searched the jagged rocks above. Then she saw it, a glint, almost imperceptible, the reflection of sunlight off glass. A scope. She lifted her rifle with fluid precision, ignoring the modern optics of her comrades. Through the simple iron sights, she found the shape of a sniper hidden in the shadows. He thought himself invisible, confident that his modern weapon would give him the advantage. But Eleanor had hunted ghosts like him for decades. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the shot rang out like thunder in the mountains. The figure above slumped silently, his rifle tumbling down the rocks. The squad stared upward in shock, realizing how close they had come to walking into another slaughter. Markson whispered, "How did you even see him?" Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on the cliffs. "Because I was looking," she said simply. There was no arrogance, no triumph, just the quiet truth of a soldier who had learned to survive by never underestimating the enemy. The squad moved on, their pace quicker now, fueled by the knowledge that she was watching over them with eyes sharper than any scope. Each step carried them closer to the outpost, but also deeper into the realization that they were bound not by orders or duty, but by the presence of one woman and her aged gun, which had become the lifeline of them all. The climb toward the ridgeline seemed endless, each step dragging heavier than the last as the squad forced themselves upward. The path narrowed so thin at points that one misstep meant tumbling into the misty abyss below. Exhaustion gnawed at their bodies, hunger whispered in their stomachs, but fear was what kept them sharp, fear of what lay in the shadows above and behind. Eleanor led them without faltering, her boots finding purchase where others slipped, her rifle always ready, her eyes sweeping every ridge, every bend, as if she had walked this path 100 times before. The younger soldiers whispered among themselves, voices hushed with reverence now, not mockery. They called her things they hadn't dared before: guardian, ghost, hawk-eyed savior. It was no longer the lieutenant they followed, but her. The outpost was still miles away, perched beyond the ridge in a shallow basin, but the promise of its safety drew them onward. They dreamed of radio contact, hot food, bandages, and a reprieve from the constant edge of death. Yet deep down, every one of them knew the enemy was not finished. Ambushes were not accidents, they were calculated. If insurgents had chosen this valley, it was because they intended to choke supply lines, to bleed convoys dry until nothing remained. Eleanor knew it too, though she did not voice it. Her silence was enough. She carried that weight alone, so the others wouldn't crumble under it. As they neared the crest of the ridge, the air grew still, unnaturally still. Birds had vanished, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor slowed, raising her hand. The squad halted instantly, tense and silent, eyes searching the rocks. The path widened into a plateau littered with boulders and jagged formations that created natural cover, perfect for an ambush. Markson cursed under his breath, realizing what she already knew. They were walking into a kill zone. He moved beside her, whispering, "Options?" She kept her eyes forward. "Move fast. Don't give them time to box us in. And when they fire, don't panic. Keep moving downhill." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. She had already raised her rifle. The trap was sprung. The first explosion erupted to their left, a landmine hidden under loose gravel, sending 2 men flying, their screams torn away by the blast. Gunfire followed immediately, thunderous and deafening, pouring from the cliffs that overlooked the plateau. Bullets chipped stone and tore into packs, driving the squad into cover behind the scattered rocks. Men shouted, confusion rising as muzzle flashes surrounded them from all sides. The enemy had prepared well. More guns, more angles, and more ferocity than before. It felt like the valley itself had turned into a cage and they were the prey. Eleanor's rifle cracked through the chaos, a sound sharper and steadier than all the rest. She did not waste a single shot. Each pull of the trigger carried death to the hidden figures above. One by one, enemy silhouettes toppled from their perches, their bodies tumbling down the cliffs. The squad, emboldened, returned fire with renewed focus, no longer spraying wildly but following her lead, aiming with intent. Even Markson felt the shift. Her calm precision was infectious. "Stay with her," he shouted, his voice carrying strength it hadn't before. But the enemy was relentless. Grenades rolled down from the ridges, exploding among them, shaking the ground and sending shards of rock into flesh. Private Collins was thrown to the ground, ears ringing, blood streaking his temple. He blinked through the haze to see Eleanor kneel beside him, firing another shot without even looking at him, then dragging him to cover with a strength that defied her years. "Stay awake," she ordered, her voice cutting through the fog in his head. "You're not done yet." He clutched his weapon tighter, forcing himself upright. For the first time in his young life, he felt the meaning of resolve, not born of orders or training, but of watching someone refuse to yield, even against impossible odds. The firefight dragged on for what felt like hours but was only minutes. The squad was pinned, the enemy's firepower superior, and their ammunition dwindling fast. Markson's voice cracked over the din. "We can't hold this. We'll be slaughtered." But before panic could take root, Eleanor spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, yet every soldier heard it through the storm. "You're not here to hold. You're here to live. Aim where I aim." She rose slightly from cover, exposed to the ridges, her rifle steady as stone. The squad watched her, and when she fired, they fired too, focusing their volleys on the same ridge, overwhelming it with sudden precision. Enemy fire faltered there, opening a gap. Eleanor's voice came again, "Move." And they did. They surged through the gap like water breaking a dam, sprinting downhill into the basin beyond the plateau, firing as they ran. The enemy tried to regroup to cut them off, but Eleanor's rifle barked again and again, each shot carving space for her squad to escape. She moved with them, never behind, never faltering, her aged gun the vanguard of their retreat. By the time they reached the cover of the lower rocks, the enemy fire had thinned. The insurgents had underestimated them again, and this time it was not just Eleanor's bullet that saved them, it was her will, igniting every man around her into fighting harder, sharper, braver. When the last echoes faded, the plateau was a graveyard of broken bodies and shattered stone. The squad crouched in the basin, panting, some wounded, some barely conscious but alive. They looked back at the battlefield above, disbelief etched on their faces. They had survived another impossible storm. Eleanor sat with them, her rifle across her knees, smoke curling from its barrel. The squad's eyes turned to her, not with awe alone now, but with trust, a trust forged in blood and fire. She had led them through hell again, and though the road to the outpost was still long and fraught with danger, they no longer feared the shadows. They had her. And with her, even death itself seemed hesitant to take them. The basin offered only brief relief. The squad crouched among the rocks, catching their breath, their chests heaving as the weight of survival settled in. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood, and though they had escaped the plateau, they knew the enemy would not let them go so easily. The ridge behind them loomed like a scar, dotted with the dark shapes of fallen insurgents. Every man and woman in the squad carried wounds now, some visible, others hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and fear, but they carried something else too, something stronger than before, the unspoken knowledge that they were alive because of Eleanor. Lieutenant Markson sat against a rock, his helmet cracked, a shallow cut bleeding down his cheek. He looked at her across the makeshift camp, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a strange new humility. He had worn command-like armor, but he knew now it was Eleanor's steel that had held them together. He found himself asking, almost reluctantly, "How much further?" Eleanor studied the horizon, her eyes narrowing against the pale morning light. "A day, maybe less if we keep moving." She paused, her voice low. "If they don't catch us first." The men stirred uneasily at her words, but she did not soften them. She never offered comfort through lies. Her strength lay in truth, even when it cut sharp. They gathered what little strength remained and pressed onward, leaving the basin behind. The terrain shifted as they moved closer to the ridge that separated them from the outpost. The cliffs gave way to scattered forests, thin trees stretching like skeletal hands into the sky, their leaves wet with the remnants of rain. The earth softened, the mud replaced by damp soil that muffled their steps. It was quieter here, unnervingly so, and every rustle in the underbrush made hearts race. The squad moved in tight formation, weapons raised, eyes darting constantly. Eleanor remained at the front, her rifle resting across her shoulder, her gaze steady. Her silence guided them more than words ever could. As they pushed deeper into the trees, Markson caught up beside her. His voice was rough, worn thin by exhaustion. "They'll be waiting, won't they? At the ridge." Eleanor did not look at him. "If they're smart, yes." If they're desperate, they'll try before then. He swallowed hard, understanding the weight of her meaning. Desperate enemies were often the most dangerous. Behind them, Private Collins trudged forward, his bandaged head aching but his spirit burning with a new fire. He no longer saw Eleanor as a relic of an old war. To him, she was proof that courage was not about age or weapons but about the refusal to break. He kept his eyes on her back, drawing strength from every steady step she took. It was midday when the forest gave way to a clearing, and the squad froze at the sight before them. A ruined village lay scattered across the valley floor, houses collapsed into rubble, smoke still curling faintly from blackened wood. It was the kind of place where enemies could hide in every shadow, where death could lurk behind any broken wall. Markson ordered caution, but Eleanor was already moving, her eyes sweeping the ruins. She moved like a hunter through familiar terrain, every sense alert. The others followed reluctantly, nerves taut, fingers white on their triggers. The silence of the village was suffocating, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Then it came, a sound, faint but distinct, the shuffle of boots on stone. Eleanor's rifle snapped to her shoulder instantly. She fired once, and a figure crumpled behind the shell of a collapsed house. The silence shattered as gunfire erupted from every corner of the ruins. The enemy had been waiting, concealed among the wreckage, patient as spiders. The squad dove for cover, bullets chewing through splintered wood and shattered walls. Chaos reigned once again, men shouting, smoke rising as grenades detonated against the ground. But amid the storm, Eleanor's rifle cracked in its measured rhythm. She moved through the ruins with uncanny precision, her aged gun finding targets the others could not even see. Every time an enemy revealed themselves for a fraction of a second, her bullet was there to meet them. The squad, hardened now by her example, fought differently too. They no longer wasted ammunition in panic. They aimed, they moved as she moved, and slowly the tide shifted. The ruins became a graveyard for the enemy, their ambush unraveling under the relentless precision of one woman and the soldiers she had reshaped. Yet victory came at a cost. Sergeant Ramirez, one of the squad's strongest, took a round to the chest while pulling a medic to safety. He fell with a gasp, his blood soaking the dirt. The medic tried desperately to stop the bleeding, but Eleanor knew by the look in Ramirez's eyes that it was already too late. She knelt beside him as he struggled for breath. His lips trembled as he whispered, How do you do it?" Eleanor's expression softened for the first time, her hand pressing firmly against his shoulder. "I don't," she said quietly. "We do." His eyes closed with a faint smile and then he was gone. Eleanor stood, her jaw clenched, her rifle raised once more. There was no time to grieve. She fought harder, each shot fired with a weight heavier than the last, until the ruins fell silent again. When it was over, the squad regrouped among the rubble, their numbers smaller now, their faces grim. They looked at Eleanor with eyes that no longer held disbelief or even awe, but something deeper, faith. She had become more than their captain, more than a soldier with an old rifle. She was the will that kept them alive, the fire that would not let them extinguish. As they buried Ramirez beneath the broken stones of the village, Markson approached her once more. "The men are asking," he said quietly, "if we'll make it." Eleanor looked at him, her face unreadable, then turned her gaze to the ridge beyond the ruins. "We'll make it," she answered simply. And for the first time, Markson believed her without doubt. The grave they left behind in the ruins weighed heavier on them than the packs across their shoulders. Ramirez's absence was a wound that no bandage could close, a reminder that every step toward the outpost came at a cost measured in blood. Yet even grief did not slow them. They moved onward through the scarred land, their boots crunching over broken stone, their breaths harsh in the cold afternoon air. No one spoke. Words felt meaningless against the silence Ramirez had left, and so they let Eleanor's steady pace pull them forward. She did not falter, though her eyes carried the shadows of every loss she had endured. Her rifle hung at her side, but her grip was tight, her senses sharp. She had seen too many battles end in quiet stretches just before the storm. The ridge loomed closer with each passing hour, jagged and steep, its slopes scarred by old shell craters. The outpost lay just beyond it. The thought of safety, of walls and radio contact, was a flame in the minds of the soldiers, but with that flame came fear. Safety was so close now that it felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with a single strike. Markson walked near Eleanor, his voice low. "They know where we're going. If they want to break us, that ridge is their last chance." She did not answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the cliffs ahead, every movement in the distance suspect, every shadow a potential rifle barrel. At last she said, then we'll have to break them first. By dusk they reached the lower slopes, the path winding upward in a cruel ascent. The incline punished their already battered bodies, stealing breath from their lungs, grinding their legs into fire. The medics struggled most, their packs still heavy with bandages and morphine. Eleanor moved among them silently, helping redistribute the weight, her hand steadying one man who stumbled dangerously close to the edge. The squad followed her like pilgrims following a guide through sacred ground. None questioned her now, her wordless commands were instinctively obeyed. Every soldier knew that hesitation meant death and she allowed none of it. Halfway up the ridge, the silence broke. The first shot cracked from above, sparking against rock inches from Markson's head. Then another and another until the mountainside erupted in fire. The enemy had dug in along the ridge, fortified in positions impossible to see until it was too late. The squad scattered, diving for what little cover the rocks provided, but the slope left them exposed, bullets raining down like hail. Men shouted, rolling behind boulders, their return fire desperate and thin. The enemy's advantage was overwhelming, they held the high ground and from above, death came fast. One soldier screamed as a bullet tore through his thigh, another cried out for a medic before collapsing face-first in the dirt. Eleanor moved like she had expected this all along. She ducked behind a jagged rock, loading a single round with calm precision, then raised her rifle and fired. A sniper's muzzle flash winked out instantly, the man tumbling down the slope. She shifted, reloaded, fired again, another target silenced. Her rhythm cut through the panic, her rifle's deep crack like a drumbeat for the squad to rally around. "Don't waste shots," she barked over the gunfire, her voice sharp as steel. "Pick your targets." The men obeyed, focusing their fire, following her lead. The tide slowed just enough to let them breathe. But the enemy did not relent. Mortar shells whistled down, exploding in geysers of fire and stone that shook the ridge beneath their boots. Shrapnel ripped through the air, tearing into flesh and fabric. Private Collins was thrown to the ground, ears ringing, his vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw Eleanor stand above him, rifle braced, firing steadily as if the storm could not touch her. He forced himself up, fueled by the sight of her unyielding figure, and added his own fire to the fight. Around him, others did the same. Fear gave way to determination, their terror replaced by a kind of defiance that grew with every shot Eleanor fired. Markson crawled beside her, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "We can't climb like this, they'll cut us to pieces before we reach the top." Eleanor's eyes never left her sights. "Then we make them move. Force them out." She scanned the ridge, spotting a cluster of enemies entrenched near a crumbling overhang. It was their stronghold, the position anchoring the ambush. Without hesitation, she chambered another round, took aim at the rocks above them, and fired. The bullet struck true, dislodging a cascade of stone. The overhang groaned, then collapsed in a thunderous landslide, crushing the enemy position and sending survivors scrambling. The shockwave rippled through the rest of the ambushers, their fire faltering as panic spread. "Now!" Eleanor shouted. The squad surged upward, climbing through smoke and falling debris, firing as they advanced. The ridge became a battlefield of brutal close-quarters combat, men grappling behind rocks, rifles cracking at point-blank range, knives flashing in the dim light. Eleanor was in the thick of it, her aged rifle now too slow for the chaos, so she used it as a weapon itself, swinging the heavy stock into an enemy's jaw before drawing her sidearm. She fought with the fury of someone who had nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. Her presence carved a path, her unyielding form leading them through the slaughter. When at last the gunfire faded, the ridge was theirs. Bodies littered the ground, smoke curled from shattered weapons, and the cries of the wounded echoed against the mountains. The squad stood panting, their numbers thinned yet again but alive. The outpost lay just beyond, its faint lights flickering in the distance like a promise of salvation. For the first time the soldiers allowed themselves to hope. Markson stood beside Eleanor, his chest heaving, his voice rough. "We did it," he breathed. But Eleanor only stared at the lights, her jaw set. "No," she said quietly. "Not yet." For she knew better than anyone that hope was a fragile thing, and the closer it burned, the more fiercely the darkness fought to snuff it out. The ridge was behind them, but its ghosts clung to their heels as they descended the far side toward the outpost. Darkness had fallen completely, and the lights of the stronghold flickered faintly in the distance like dying stars. The squad moved carefully, every step a strain against exhaustion and pain. Their wounds ached, their throats were dry, but the sight of those lights drew them on, a promise they could not abandon. Eleanor led them without hesitation, though her legs burned and her shoulders throbbed from the weight of battle. Her face was calm, almost too calm, as though she knew that the night was not finished testing them. The terrain flattened at the base of the ridge, opening into a wide plain scattered with wreckage, abandoned vehicles, shattered crates, and bones half buried in the dirt. The place stank of rust and decay, the air thick with the memory of past battles. Markson raised his rifle warily, scanning the shadows. "This is wrong," he muttered. "The outpost is lit, but there should have been patrols. Scouts. Something." Eleanor nodded once, her eyes narrowing. "They're waiting," she said. The certainty in her voice made the others shift uneasily, fingers tightening on triggers. The silence of the plane was too deep, too deliberate. As they crossed the open ground, the silence broke. Flare rockets streaked into the sky, bathing the field in harsh red light. Then came the roar of engines. From the wreckage rose armored trucks, their hulking forms painted with the enemy's insignia, headlights slicing through the night. Dozens of soldiers poured from the vehicles, encircling the squad in a tightening ring of steel and gunfire. Bullets ripped through the plane, sparking off wrecks, carving lines into the dirt. The squad dove for cover where there was almost none, scrambling behind rusting carcasses of vehicles, their return fire dwarfed by the storm. Private Collins screamed as he was pulled down by two enemies, his blood painting the sand before Eleanor's bullet found them both. She fought with precision, every shot deliberate, every movement born from years of survival. Her rifle barked in steady rhythm, cutting through the chaos, but even she knew the numbers were against them. The squad was trapped, overwhelmed, their circle shrinking with every minute. Markson cursed, firing until his rifle clicked empty. "We can't hold them," he shouted over the din. Eleanor slammed another round into her rifle, her jaw tight. "Then we don't hold. We cut through." She scanned the ring, eyes locking on the largest truck at the far edge. Its antenna flickered with light, command vehicle, the heart of the ambush. Without hesitation, she broke from cover, sprinting low across open ground, her boots pounding the earth. Bullets snapped past her, kicking up dust, but she did not slow. Her rifle cracked once, twice, enemies falling in her path until she reached the truck. She slammed the butt of her rifle into the driver's skull, pulled him from the seat, and fired point-blank into the officer at the console. The machine sparked, flames erupting, the command link severed. The enemy line faltered, chaos rippling through their ranks as shouts rose in confusion. The squad seized the moment, surging forward, cutting down soldiers in their path. Markson rallied them with a raw cry, his voice hoarse. "Through them. Move." The plane became a slaughter, blood and fire mixing with the acrid stench of burning fuel. Eleanor fought at the front, her rifle swinging like a hammer, her sidearms spitting death at every shadow that dared rise against them. Her body was tired, broken in places unseen, but her will was steel. She carved a path toward the outpost's faint lights, her squad following in her wake like ships chasing a beacon. The battle dragged, each second an eternity of noise and pain. Men screamed, weapons jammed, blades flashed in desperate hand-to-hand struggle. Eleanor saw Collins fall and rise again, bleeding but still fighting. She saw Markson take a bullet to the shoulder and keep pushing, his face twisted in fury. Every soldier bore wounds, but none yielded. The outpost was too close now, hope too strong to let go. Eleanor fired her last rifle round into the chest of a charging enemy, then swung the empty weapon like a club, smashing bone and armor alike. The gun, mocked so many times before, was now more than steel and wood. It was survival, it was defiance, it was the voice of everyone who had died to get them here. At last the squad broke through. The last line of enemies crumbled under their fury, bodies falling into the dust, their armored trucks burning behind them. The plane was silent again, but this silence was different. It was the silence of victory, fragile and heavy, carrying with it the price of what they had done. The squad stood battered, bloodied, their eyes hollow but alight with something deeper, the fire of the living. Markson staggered to Eleanor's side, clutching his wounded arm. He looked at her with something like awe. "You did it," he said, his voice a rasp. But Eleanor shook her head, her gaze fixed on the outpost, now so close they could see the shadows of its walls. "No," she whispered, her eyes dark. "We're not safe yet. Not until we know who lit those lights." The words struck them like a cold wind. The outpost, their salvation, their sanctuary, it might already belong to the enemy. The thought settled in their bones, chilling even the fire of victory. But there was no choice left. They would go forward because there was nothing else to do. Eleanor raised her rifle, battered and empty, but still gripped with unyielding hands. "Stay ready," she said softly, and her squad obeyed. Together they walked into the night, toward the flickering lights of the outpost, uncertain whether they were walking into refuge or the jaws of a trap. The lights of the outpost flickered brighter as they approached, casting long shadows over the blood-soaked plain they had left behind. The walls rose from the darkness like a fortress of stone and steel, but something about them felt wrong, lifeless, as if they were only a shell waiting to be filled with death. The squad tightened together, moving cautiously, every step measured. Their wounds ached, fatigue clawed at their bones, yet not one of them spoke of stopping. Eleanor led them with her rifle gripped tightly in her hands, though it carried no bullets now. It was no longer a weapon so much as a part of her, the extension of her will that had carried them through the impossible. As they drew closer, the gate loomed open, metal doors bent inward as if forced. The silence deepened, so heavy it pressed against their ears. No guards, no patrols, no movement save for the faint sway of a loose cable dangling from the wall. Markson frowned, his voice low but edged with unease. "It's too quiet." Collins, limping with his side bandaged, muttered, "Maybe they left it abandoned." Eleanor shook her head. "No. This was deliberate. Someone wanted us to see these lights." She stepped inside the gate, every muscle taut, her eyes sweeping the shadows. The interior of the outpost was a graveyard. Barracks lay smashed, vehicles burned to twisted husks, the ground littered with helmets and weapons left where they fell. But there were no bodies. Not a single corpse marked the carnage, only stains of blood that told of battles fought and lives erased. The squad moved through the ruins in silence, their breath loud in the stillness. Collins shivered as he whispered, "Where are they?" No one answered. Eleanor's instinct screamed that they were being watched, every broken wall hiding unseen eyes, every shadow deeper than it should be. At the center of the outpost stood the command tower, its top still glowing with the generator lights that had lured them. Eleanor halted at the base of the stairs, her hand raised. "Stay alert," she ordered, her voice calm but hard. One by one they ascended the steps, the metal groaning beneath their weight. The door at the top stood ajar, light spilling from within. Eleanor pushed it open with her rifle barrel and entered first. The room inside was intact, maps scattered across a wide table, communication equipment still humming softly. And in the center, sitting in the glow of a hanging lamp, was a single figure. The figure rose slowly and the squad froze. It was a woman, dressed in the uniform of their enemy, her face pale and scarred by battle, her eyes sharp with cruel amusement. In her hand she held a pistol, though it hung loosely at her side as if she didn't need it. She smiled faintly at Eleanor. "You made it," she said, her voice smooth, mocking. "I wondered how many of you would survive the plane. Fewer than I expected, but enough." Eleanor kept her rifle steady though she had no bullets left. "You set the trap." The woman inclined her head. "Of course. I've been waiting for you. Word of your stubborn little squad reached me weeks ago. And you?" Her eyes lingered on Eleanor, "the woman with the relic gun who refuses to die. You're the one they whispered about. The one who embarrassed my men again and again. I had to see it for myself." The squad tensed, weapons half raised, but the woman didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the table, tapping a finger against the maps. "This outpost was bait. The lights, the silence, it was all to draw you in. And now here you are, exhausted, bleeding, your guns nearly empty. You should surrender. You've already won more than anyone expected of you. No shame in laying down arms." Markson spat on the floor. "We don't surrender." Collins tightened his grip on his weapon, shaking but defiant. Eleanor's voice cut through, calm as steel. "You think we came all this way to give up at your feet? No. If we fall, it will be fighting." The enemy woman's smile widened. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." She raised her pistol sharply and chaos erupted. Bullets tore across the room as the squad dove for cover, returning fire with what little ammunition they had left. The air filled with smoke and shouts, the clang of metal and the crack of guns. Eleanor charged forward, swinging her empty rifle like a club, smashing it against the enemy woman's pistol hand. The gun clattered across the floor, but the woman was fast, striking Eleanor with brutal precision. The two clashed hand to hand, blows landing hard enough to bruise bone. Around them, the squad battled enemy reinforcements that surged through side doors, shadows spilling into the room like a tide. Eleanor staggered under a heavy punch, blood in her mouth, but her grip on the rifle never loosened. She swung it upward, striking the woman across the jaw, sending her reeling. The room shook with fire and fury, her squad holding the line with everything left in them. Collins fell with a cry but dragged himself up again, firing until his weapon clicked empty. Markson tackled an enemy soldier into the wall, his knife flashing. Every heartbeat was a gamble, every second survival carved from the edge of death. At last, Eleanor and the enemy woman locked again, their struggle brutal and desperate. The woman snarled, shoving Eleanor against the table, her hand closing around Eleanor's throat. "You should have died on the plane," she hissed. But Eleanor, eyes blazing, rammed the stock of her rifle into the woman's ribs, then pressed the barrel against her chest. With one last bullet she had hidden, chambered long ago for a moment she knew would come, she pulled the trigger. The gun roared, the shot echoing through the tower. The enemy woman's eyes widened in shock before she crumpled, lifeless, to the floor. Silence fell. The reinforcements, leaderless, faltered, retreating into the shadows as the squad pressed them out. The room reeked of smoke and blood, but the outpost was theirs. Eleanor stood over the fallen body, her chest heaving, her battered rifle still in her hands. Markson limped to her side, his eyes wide. "One shot," he whispered, awed. "After everything, one shot ended it." Eleanor's gaze swept the room, the faces of her weary squad, the ruins of all they had fought through. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "It wasn't just the shot. It was all of us, every step, every fight. That's what saved us." They stood together in the tower, wounded but unbroken, the survivors of a nightmare that should have killed them a dozen times over. Outside, the dawn broke at last, sunlight spilling across the plain, washing the blood and shadows in its glow. The aged gun hung heavy in Eleanor's hands, its wood scarred, its barrel blackened, yet it gleamed in the light like something eternal. Belittled, mocked, and dismissed, it had spoken in the end with a single voice that could not be ignored. And with it, Eleanor had carried her squad through the fire into the morning. The end.